In August 1939, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin shook hands across Europe. Their foreign ministers signed a non-aggression pact that shocked the world. Two sworn enemies had agreed not to fight each other. The agreement would last 10 years. It lasted 22 months. As early as July 1940, less than a year after signing the pact, Hitler ordered his generals to begin planning the invasion of the Soviet Union. On December 18, 1940, he signed Führer Directive 21, formally authorizing what would become the largest military operation in the history of human warfare. He named it after a medieval Holy Roman Emperor known for his red beard and his ruthlessness. He called it Operation Barbarossa. Along the Soviet western border, nearly 5 million Red Army soldiers waited. They had received reports of German troop movements. They had been warned by their own intelligence officers, by British intelligence, and even by a German defector who crossed the border days before the attack and told Soviet guards exactly what was coming. Stalin dismissed every warning. He believed Hitler would never attack while still at war with Britain. On the German side, 3.8 million men had assembled in secret. 3 massive army groups stretched across a front 1,800 miles wide. General Heinz Guderian commanded the 2nd Panzer Group, the armored spearhead of Army Group Center. He had crushed France in 6 weeks. He believed he could crush the Soviet Union in 8. At precisely 3:30 in the morning on Sunday, June 22, 1941, the largest invasion force ever assembled in human history crossed the Soviet border simultaneously along its entire length. Thousands of artillery pieces opened fire. 3,000 aircraft lifted off into the darkness. The soldiers of the Red Army, sleeping in their barracks, woke up to the sound of a war no one had told them was coming. In the first hour of Operation Barbarossa, the German Luftwaffe executed one of the most devastating airstrikes in military history. Wave after wave of bombers and fighters crossed into Soviet airspace before dawn, targeting every Soviet air base within range. By the end of the first day, approximately 1,200 Soviet aircraft had been destroyed, the vast majority of them on the ground, still on the runway, never given the chance to take off. The Soviet Air Force had effectively ceased to exist in a single morning. In the West, it had taken Germany 6 weeks to defeat France. On June 22, 1941, they destroyed an entire air force before breakfast. On the ground, German infantry crossed the border along the entire front simultaneously. Panzer divisions punched through Soviet defensive lines before the defenders even understood what was happening. In the first week alone, German forces advanced further into Soviet territory than Napoleon had managed in his entire Russian campaign of 1812. The Red Army was caught completely off guard. Officers had no orders. Communications had been severed. Entire divisions received contradictory commands, or no commands at all. Men who had been training for years to fight a modern war found themselves retreating through burning forests with no food, no maps, and no idea where the front line was. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin received the news and went silent. For 10 to 11 days after the invasion began, the Soviet leader was effectively unreachable. Paralyzed by shock, retreating to his dacha outside Moscow. The man who had purged his own officer corps, who had ignored every warning, who had signed the pact with Hitler himself, could not process what he had allowed to happen. The Soviet Union was burning, and its leader had disappeared. The German blitzkrieg that had swept through Poland, France, and the Low Countries now moved east across a scale that dwarfed anything Europe had ever seen. Panzer divisions drove deep into Soviet territory at speeds the Red Army could not respond to. The flat plains of the Western Soviet Union were perfect tank country, open, fast, undefended. By June 28th and 29th, just 1 week after the invasion began, German forces had encircled the Soviet forces around the city of Minsk. When the pocket was reduced, 290,000 Soviet soldiers marched into captivity. It was the first of many encirclements, and each one was larger than the last. General Guderian pushed his panzer group forward without stopping. His tanks crossed rivers, bypassed cities, and drove hundreds of miles into Soviet territory before the infantry had caught up. By mid-July, Smolensk had fallen. Moscow seemed within reach. Guderian believed the war would be over before winter. He began planning the final drive on the Soviet capital, but not everything fell so easily. At the Brest fortress on the Soviet-Polish border, a garrison of Soviet soldiers held out for weeks against overwhelming German forces. The Germans had expected to take the fortress on the first day. It took them more than a week, and even then, isolated defenders continued to fight inside the walls for weeks after the main garrison fell. In the rubble of Brest, the Germans caught their first glimpse of what Soviet resistance would actually look like. And yet, the encirclements continued. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers cut off from supply and command had no choice but to surrender. By the end of July, 3 million Soviet soldiers had been killed, wounded, or captured. 3 million men in 5 weeks. Germany had never seen anything like it. Neither had the Soviet Union. And then, Hitler made a decision that his generals believed would cost Germany the war. In August 1941, with Army Group Center poised to drive on Moscow just weeks away, Hitler ordered it to stop. He turned his attention south to Ukraine. He wanted Kyiv. He wanted the wheat fields and coal mines and industrial resources of the south. Guderian argued furiously against the decision. Hitler overruled him. Army Group Center's offensive on Moscow was halted for 11 weeks. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group turned south toward Kyiv. Combined with Army Group South driving north, a massive pincer movement began to close around the entire Soviet southwestern front. 4 complete Soviet armies, hundreds of thousands of men, commanded by General Mikhail Kirponos. On September 16, 1941, the 2 German panzer groups linked up east of Kyiv. The trap was closed, inside the pocket. 452,000 Soviet soldiers, 2,600 guns, and 64 tanks. It was the largest encirclement in the history of warfare, a record that stands to this day. General Kirponos refused to abandon his men. On September 20th, 1941, while attempting to lead a breakout through German lines, he was killed. His front had suffered 700,000 casualties in the battle for Kyiv, killed, captured, or missing. The Southwestern Front, one of the most powerful Soviet formations at the start of the invasion, had ceased to exist. According to German records, 665,000 Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner at Kyiv. It was the worst single defeat in the history of the Red Army, and it had cost Germany 11 weeks. 11 weeks that Hitler's generals believed had made the capture of Moscow impossible before winter arrived. On September 8, 1941, Army Group North, aided by Finnish forces, completed the encirclement of Leningrad. The city of 3 million people was cut off from the rest of the Soviet Union. Hitler did not want to assault it directly, for he intended to starve it into surrender. The siege of Leningrad had begun. It would last 872 days. On October 2nd, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Typhoon, the final drive on Moscow. Army Group Center, rested and reinforced after the Kyiv diversion, moved forward again. Hitler predicted Moscow would fall within weeks. His generals, for once, agreed with him. Then the rain came. October in western Russia brought what the locals called Rasputitsa, the season of mud. The dirt roads of the Soviet Union, designed for horses and wooden carts, dissolved under the weight of German tanks and supply trucks. Panzer divisions that had crossed hundreds of miles of open steppe were now advancing less than a mile a day through axle-deep mud. The supply lines, already stretched beyond their limits, collapsed entirely. In mid-November, the ground froze hard enough to move again. German panzer divisions made one final push. Forward units reached the Moscow-Volga Canal and captured a railway station on the outskirts of the city. German officers reported being able to see the spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars. They were 12 miles from the center of Moscow. They would never get any closer. Stalin had received intelligence that Japan would not attack in the east. He made a decision that would save Moscow. He transferred 18 fresh divisions from Siberia, soldiers trained and equipped for extreme winter warfare, by rail to the capital. They arrived just in time. The German army had been designed to win fast wars. It had no winter uniforms, no winter lubricants for its weapons, no cold weather fuel for its vehicles. The temperature outside Moscow dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius and kept falling. Machine guns froze. Tank engines could not start. Men who had marched through summer in light field uniforms now stood in the open with no shelter, no supplies, and nowhere to retreat to. On December 5th, 1941, the Soviet Union launched a massive counteroffensive along the entire Moscow front. 100 divisions, over 500,000 men, struck the exhausted, frozen German lines simultaneously. The Germans, who had come within sight of Moscow, began to retreat. It was the first time in the war that the Wehrmacht had been driven back. Marshal Georgy Zhukov commanded the Soviet defense of Moscow. The same man who would later take Berlin in 1945 now drove the Germans away from the Soviet capital. His counteroffensive pushed Army Group Center back over 200 miles, erasing months of German advance in weeks. The German retreat threatened to become a rout. Soldiers abandoned equipment, vehicles and artillery in the snow. Units dissolved under Soviet pressure. For a moment, it appeared that the entire Eastern Front might collapse. The army that had seemed invincible 6 months earlier was being driven back through the same territory it had conquered. Hitler issued what became known as the Stand or Die Order. German forces were forbidden from retreating further under penalty of death. Commanders who ordered unauthorized withdrawals were relieved and court-martialed. The order stopped the collapse, but at catastrophic cost. Soldiers held their positions in temperatures that killed men as effectively as Soviet bullets. By the end of 1941, the German army had suffered over 830,000 casualties on the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa lasted 167 days, from June 22nd to December 5th, 1941. In those 167 days, it became the largest and costliest military operation in human history. More men, more tanks, more guns, and more aircraft were committed than had ever been deployed in a single offensive before or since. The Soviet Union did not collapse. Its factories, relocated to the Ural Mountains beyond the reach of German bombers, kept producing. The T-34 tank, which had shocked German commanders when they first encountered it in July 1941, was being built in increasing numbers. Soviet mobilization, which Germany had assumed would break under the first blow, was only beginning. Germany now faced the nightmare scenario its generals had warned against for years: a two-front war. In the West, Britain held. In the East, the Soviet Union had not only survived, but had driven Germany back from Moscow. Hitler had gambled everything on a quick victory. He had not won it, and in war, when you fail to win quickly, the slow grinding weight of numbers eventually tells. By December 1941, the Red Army had suffered 4 million casualties. 3 million Soviet soldiers were starving in German prisoner-of-war camps, where the deliberate German policy of starvation would kill the vast majority of them. The scale of Soviet losses was staggering, and yet the Soviet Union was still fighting. Germany had killed or captured more men than Napoleon had ever faced, and the war was just beginning. Hitler had said, "You only have to kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." He kicked in the door. The structure did not fall. Instead, something vast and cold and patient began to push back. From the frozen fields outside Moscow in December 1941, the road led in only one direction, and it ended 3.5 years later in the ruins of Berlin.